Card games have a unique problem that very few other game genres seem to have. Games add new content all the time to keep their player base invested, but some games will handle new content very differently than others. Let's use League of Legends as an example. When League of Legends adds a new character to the game, they need to make sure that that character's balanced and that it doesn't hard counter or get hard countered by any other character. The dev team will have to compare the new character against all of the other characters. They need to put a lot of thought into making sure that new character doesn't break their game. Card games are no exceptions to this. Card games like Hearthstone will regularly receive new expansions. A dump of new cards will be added to the game, and the dev team needs to make sure none of the new cards are too powerful when interacting with any of the old cards. But instead of comparing one single character in League of Legends to about 130 other characters, Blizzard is comparing anywhere between 80 and 130 cards with the last 5 years worth of cards. That's 2,504 playable cards, 1,948 of which are collectible. So how did Blizzard solve this issue? Well, they added 2 separate matchmaking queues, Standard and Wild. Standard is on a rotation. It features the last 2 years of cards to play with, and every year, the oldest set of cards are rotated out, unable to be used in Standard. For example, in 2019, the 3 sets from 2017 were rotated out, unable to be used in Standard. In 2020, 2018's cards will be rotated out. Wild allows the use of every single card in the history of Hearthstone. Blizzard's answer to the colossal backlog of cards is to essentially ignore them and only balance the new sets around the last 2 years of expansions. Because of this, Wild will often see very absurd interactions between cards, creating games that are won or lost on turn 5 or 6, or where players can regularly one-shot you by turn 10. Wild will very rarely see any nerfs to cards. This is a mostly effective strategy for balancing their game. The vast majority of players will play Standard, where cards are fine-tuned and no interactions are too overpowered. Anybody who plays Wild knows full well what they're getting themselves into, but there's still one problem with this balancing strategy. The Classic set. The Classic set is the set that Hearthstone launched with. Before any of the other expansions were released, these were the only collectible cards. The set features 237 cards, and they've come to define the game much more than some players would like. When rotation comes, Blizzard will rotate a select few cards from the Classic set every year in what they call the Hall of Fame, but they only rotate out 3 or 4 cards a year, leaving a very large number of cards to still exist in Standard. This means that there are very powerful deck-defining cards that have existed for the entire duration of Hearthstone's history. It risks making gameplay extremely repetitive. It's no surprise to anyone that it's extremely important for a game to not become stale and repetitive. If it's repetitive, it gets boring, and if it gets boring, the player base vanishes and kills the game. Blizzard is still yet to address a number of cards that have been causing issues for half a decade. Some of the worst culprits have already been sent away to the Hall of Fame, leaving Standard for good. All of these cards have enabled very powerful and frustrating playstyles to deal with. Cards like this are allowed to exist, but if they stick around for too long, they can make the game very stale. It also makes it very difficult for Blizzard to print any new cards that fill the same roles as these old and powerful cards did. Why play the new card when the old card does the same job, but better? Some frustrating cards have already been rotated out, but the rest of the Classic set is still around, and certain cards are continuing to cause problems. Let's talk through some examples. Malygos allows for very strong combo decks to break into the meta, and he enables a number of classes to be able to one-turn kill their opponents. And quite frankly, it's getting pretty tiresome. One-turn kill decks aren't a problem in and of themselves, but they do become a problem when most of these one-turn kill decks are using the exact same card as a finisher, and have been doing for the last 5 years. Malygos is a very powerful card in the right style of deck, but Blizzard is going to have a very hard time printing any other powerful finishers while Malygos is still in Standard. Another similar problem card is Alexstrasza. It's a very powerful combo enabler. Malygos and Alexstrasza are often both seen in the same decks together. Once again, cards like Alexstrasza are allowed to exist, but they've been clogging up the meta for far too long. Murloc Warleader poses a much more aggressive problem. Malygos and Alexstrasza require you to spend time building a combo, playing defensively until the right moment to kill your opponent arises. But Murloc Warleader, on the other hand, just wants you to play Murlocs and punch your opponent in the face to kill them as quickly as possible. It could be argued that aggressive strategies get tiresome much quicker than slow combo strategies do, and I think I'd personally agree with that. And Murloc Warleader has seen a nerf in the past, making me feel very confused as to why it wasn't Hall of Famed last year. The last card I want to talk about is the one I personally hate the most. It's the card that I've been praying to be sent off to Wild for the last 2 years. And that card's none other than Leroy Jenkins. Leroy seems fairly innocuous at first. Burst damage from hand isn't necessarily a problem, but the reason he's a problem is because he's one of the best burst options for aggressive decks in the entire game. And he's a neutral card, meaning any class can use him. And he's been around for 5 years. This means that just about every aggressive deck in every class will run Leroy as a finisher, and it gets pretty tiring when every single aggressive deck is killing you with Leroy. Some people wonder if Blizzard don't want to get rid of Leroy just because of how iconic he is as a character. He's iconic not only to Hearthstone but to Blizzard as a whole, but he really starts to lose his charm when you associate hearing his voice with the overwhelming dread of losing to a rogue on turn 5. There are a number of problem cards I didn't get to talking about in this video, such as Gadget Zan Auctioneer, Savage Raw, and Edwin Van Cleef, just to name a few. Tell me in the comments if you think I missed any other obvious culprits. The TLDR of the Classic set's problem is that powerful cards in the Classic set cause the exact same playstyle to prevail time and time again, meaning that most metas will have a lot of the same cards appearing in the top decks. The Classic set is being addressed by Blizzard, slowly but surely, as they rotate cards out to the Hall of Fame, but their choice of which cards to Hall of Fame is always a highly contentious one every time the rotation comes around again, and for good reason. I'll just make sure to cross my fingers and pray that Leroy is the one sent off to the gulag that is Wild next time. Thanks for watching.